Hello! Hello. Hi. I've completely forgotten what I was supposed to be talking about at all. Okay. When it comes to historical costuming, the most essential part is always the foundation garments. Without the proper support underneath the garment, the final ensemble will never look or behave as correctly as an ensemble from the actual period would have. Which means that for my next gown I'm going to be tackling, I need to make a new corset. Now, if you are at all involved in the historical costuming community on Instagram, or if you watch a lot of CosTube, you might have realized that the 1890s are everywhere right now. It seems that every single person is making a Worth-inspired this or an 1890s that, and I love it. I have been absolutely obsessed with the 1890s ever since my amazing, fabulous, beautifully talented friend Sam made an 1890s gown for the Costume College Gala about 2 years ago. And ever since then, I've been kind of biding my time, doing a lot of research, waiting for the perfect moment to jump into this late Victorian era. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of time on my hands recently. Despite still being a full-time student, that doesn't seem right. Am I forgetting to do something? So I've decided that this is the perfect opportunity for me to finally jump into this project and really give it the time and energy that it deserves. But as I've been saying, the first item of business when starting in any new costuming era must always be the undergarments, which means I need to do some corset mock-ups. Now, starting in any new era can be incredibly daunting. But the best way to get over any fear of a project and get right to that making and learning new things is always to just begin. With research. A lot of research, which is exactly where I think I'm gonna start. So let's go, as my absolute queen, Elsa of Arendelle would say. Love you, Elsa. Into the unknown. I spent a good couple of hours, maybe days, going through the Symington Digital Collection, as well as various museum archives, researching everything I could about the 1890s silhouette. I finally narrowed it down to 2 extant Symington patterns, then printed them out to make a paper mock-up. This is a great way to get a preview of what the final corset shape will look like, but was admittedly more annoying than I expected it to be. Paper does not want to curve. After comparing the two, I then made a full mock-up of my favorite, just to confirm the shape. After that, I scaled up the original pattern on Photoshop to my size, then printed it out and got to work, tracing it before making adjustments to the measurements. For these mock-ups, I'm going to be using a canvas I bought expressly for this purpose a few months back. It's rather strong, mimicking the sturdy coutil I'll be using for the final. It's also a ridiculous bright pattern, which I find highly amusing. If you're gonna make a mock-up, you might as well make it interesting. I'm being very careful to lay the pattern out exactly the way it was drawn in the original Symington draft so that the grains line up properly, and then I'm tracing out the pattern directly onto the fabric. Why didn't I just cut it out immediately and skip this step? I'm really not sure. I'm pressing open all my seams using a tailor's ham, which really is a magical sewing tool. I truly believe that with enough creativity, a ham could probably solve any number of sewing problems. Because this is a mock-up, and honestly I'm not certain how many of them I'll be doing, I really didn't want to cut out fabric boning channels. So I decided to instead use anything I could find lying around. At first I used some cheap ribbon that I had, and then when that finally ran out, I ended up finding some polyester boning cover that I've been hoarding for the past couple of years. It's terrible for a final corset, but absolutely amazing for a test one. I added in some lacing strips, which were actually made and lent to me by my dear friend Sam. She made them when she did her 1890s corsets so that she could easily test the fit of all her mock-ups without having to put grommets on every single one. The busk I'm using, funny enough, also once belonged to Sam. Where would I be without her? I genuinely do not know. Okay, so I'm currently wearing the first mock-up, and it's a little hard to see. Yeah, that zoom made it better, wow. This ended up just being a lot of incoherent mumbling, so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown instead. This first mock-up ended up not being nearly as dramatic of a shape as I wanted. Mostly because there was not enough hip spring, which is the difference between the waist and the hip measurements. I was also including a lot of padding in the hips at this point because I thought I wasn't really going to get very far in my corset shape without it. Spoiler alert, this proved to be rather incorrect. While hip padding is incredibly important to creating the final 1890s silhouette, it's usually worn on top of the corset rather than underneath it. But that is a topic I should be getting to in another video. So the things I learned with this mock-up were 1. I needed more hip spring, and 2, the busk was way too long. Severely disappointing, that one. Honestly, this isn't that bad. I'm going to have to order a new busk, which will be fun. I took a lot of pictures for reference, and of course to send to hundreds of people asking their opinions, and then I got to work adjusting the pattern. I once again traced the pattern, this time using my ye old light board, which, by the way, kept turning on and off this entire process, and was actually rather annoying. Do I love my light board anyway? Yes. Yes, I do. A quick confession, I don't actually own any good pattern weights. For years, I've just been using random objects I found around the sewing room with varying degrees of success. Which brings us to today's sponsor, Random Sewing Room Objects. Have you ever been looking for pattern weights but just can't find any because you don't own any? Don't fear, just use the random objects lying around your sewing room. For example, coins. Lots of them. They're not good pattern weights because they're not meant to be. Little decorative eggs. Random metal thistle things. Honestly, not a great pattern weight, but there's a thistle on it, so why do you care? I know I don't. A real pattern weight. Using these should be done with caution. They are not to be trusted and can actually be rather annoying at times. Random 18th century cups. Where did you get it? You can't remember, but it's in your sewing room. Did we mention the coins yet? And finally, a small jar of buttons. Very heavy, very thin. 10 out of 10, would recommend. Random sewing room objects. There for you when you realize that you don't own any real sewing tools. So this whole time, I've been cutting, oh, this thing's in my way, okay, wait. I've been cutting this like this. Oh my goodness, okay, never, these are terrible pattern weights. So this whole time, I've been cutting this like this, right? With my hand very far behind the rotary cutter, but I happen to put my hand up more like this, and I have so much more control, and it takes like half the pressure. Was this how I was supposed to be doing this the whole time? What? I then ripped the lacing strips and busk out of the old mock-up so I could reuse them, because despite the busk being far too long, I only have the one. I took a moment of silence to remember all of the hard work I'd put into that mock-up, but then remembered I don't actually care. From here on, it's mostly more of the same, pinning and sewing pieces together. This time, though, I decided to press all of the seams as I went, rather than dealing with one large corset to press at the end. To put the busk in, I pinned a piece of fabric to the center front panel, right sides together, and then marked where the busk thingies needed to poke through so I could avoid stitching them closed. This, by the way, is what happens when your seam ripper and your awl look incredibly similar. You get very confused. Very often. I use the awl to poke holes for the other side of the busk, then slip it into place before using my zipper foot to stitch it in. Excuse me? Sir. I don't know what to do with them now. Oh no, okay, we're going outside. We are going outside. He's yours now outdoors. Goodbye. After that brief adventure, the second mock-up is finally done. As I mentioned previously, the only big change I really made with this mock-up was to shorten it and to add more width in the hips. Despite being rather happy with the shape, I decided I could do more. I took the average measurement from these two little triangles and then added them into the pattern to get as much hip spring as I thought was necessary. And with that, we are on to mock-up number 3, plus getting momentarily sidetracked by other project ideas, as one does. Oh my goodness. Wait. Yes, I completely destroyed a pin. I think now is probably a good time to put out there that many people suggest never to sew over sewing pins. Every professor I've ever had, on the other hand, has taught me to pin horizontally and sew over the pins for speed. This could be a theater thing, or it could be, as I've said before, the fact that I do not fear death, and apparently none of my professors do either. While the horizontal pinning does indeed minimize your chances of hitting a pin, as you can see here, your odds are never truly zero. And there we have it, mock-up number 3. Now I know that in corsetry it is best practice to strive to have as even of a lacing gap in the back as possible, so I decided to take off the lacing strips and adjust this mock-up in an attempt to attain that. I don't have any footage of it, but it did work and ended up being the conclusion to my mock-up making adventures. Oh, no, that didn't work. So it's done. Sorta. It's technically only a mock-up, but it does mean that I have the pattern finalized and ready to start on the final corset, which is a huge step. I'm really, really proud of where I've come with this, especially because this is really my first time kind of making and altering a pattern for any sort of corsetry past the 1830s. The next step usually would be for me to go straight into the final corset, but because this busk was way too long, I instead will be waiting until the new busk that I've ordered has come in, which will be who knows when. These days that could mean pretty much anything. It could be here tomorrow, or it could be here in 2021. So until then, I'm going to get started on some other projects, all still other 1890s undergarments that I need to complete. And I'm going to continue wearing this mock-up around. I think it's actually going to be good to have a few weeks in between making this mock-up and getting started on the final garment so that I can kind of test it out and make certain everything is good. So friends, thank you all for joining me on this little bit of a mock-up experiment. Please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself in the comments, tell me a little bit more about yourself. If you so, go ahead and tell me about some of the projects you're working on right now. I really, really love knowing more about you guys. It's really been the best part of having a channel so far, so feel free to go ahead and say hello. So from Eleanor, the slightly creepy doll, and myself, thank you all so much, and I'll be seeing you again really soon. Yeah, that's enough of this. Why do things always fall down when I'm filming? Okay, Eleanor, back in there you go.